Hello? Anybody home?
Today, I want you to open your mind.
I've almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damning that the mass of people can't deal with it.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists.
It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time.
If you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, then you have a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps.
Tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man, nor a group of men.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. Someone who is white is not more special than someone who is black. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
They do not want your children to be educated. They do not want you to think too much.
It was learned that the aliens had been and were then manipulating masses of people through secret societies, witchcraft, magic, the occult, and religion.
They reach into our children in music, television, books.
Prey on children's innocence.
How can I disprove lies that are stamped with an official seal?
So if you have the opportunity to stand next to one of these machines, it feels like an altar to an alien god.
Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc is now in the possession of the Army.
Too many others know what's happening out there. And no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth.
Any state, any entity, any ideology that fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete. A case to be filed under M for Mankind in the Twilight Zone.
It's about time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
It's the heart that says, I will not acquiesce.
Freedom is the privilege to be right. Freedom from the disasters and our mistakes.
You don't connect the dots. It's just a mass of what's all this about.
You are listening to the Secret Teachings Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. Thank you so much for tuning in to this special Friday, July 4th edition of TST Radio. If you'd like to check out our full archive of shows, you can visit our website, tstradio.info. You can email the show at rdgable@yahoo.com. And you can, of course, find us on social media, including X, Facebook, and YouTube. We do not have any other social media because we've either been kicked off of those platforms or we're unable to set up accounts on those platforms. Everything is on our website, though, as I said, tstradio.info. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank all of you who continue to listen to the show and download the show, even if you have a subscription, because that really supports us both in terms of the numbers and the availability of the show to others, and also financially through the advertisements on Spreaker. So I really want to thank you all for doing that. And for those of you who have bought books, who have subscribed, all of that keeps us on air, and that is what allows us to do these live video presentations. So if you're in the audio archive and you just heard me say video, yes, that means that you can watch this show, not just listen to it. It's on YouTube, TST Radio Official, and the link again is on the website. So where I am, it is actually July 5th. I'm in Japan, east of Tokyo. And we have a big event supposed to happen today in Japan. They're supposed to be, if the stories are accurate, if the psychic is correct, a massive earthquake today in the country. There have been a number of smaller earthquakes in Japan, up in Hokkaido, down south, a number of earthquakes that have caused some alarm because of the relationship they apparently share time-wise to this prediction that we did a show on, by the way. If you didn't hear that show, it was called Manga Earthquake, and we talked about that prediction. There have been thousands of earthquakes down south of Japan, and as a result of all this, people are thinking that there's going to be a big one today. The prediction actually is not about the Nankai Trough necessarily. That's where the experts believe the big megaquake will occur, but it's actually down further south of that. I believe it's down near, maybe even near Taiwan, very close to the southern part of Japan. But there have been earthquakes all up and down the country. And what I think is really interesting about earthquakes, I want to share this with you. What I think is really interesting about earthquakes is that earthquakes can sort of be predicted in ways that, sure, they're scientific, but they're also kind of not scientific. I mean, they're scientific in the sense that you can identify what's going to happen before it happens based on certain characteristics or features that happen in the ocean or that wash up on shore, like an oarfish, for example. Our ancestors figured out that when these deep sea fish wash on shore, that usually means that there's going to be some sort of activity, and it could be a pretty severe activity. It might be something small, but usually when deep sea fish, you saw this in Godzilla -1, Godzilla being a representation of the elements, a threat due to man's folly. Godzilla, before he comes ashore in that movie, kills, whether it's radiation or pressure in the ocean, it kills a bunch of fish, and those fish float to the surface, and those deep sea fish are an example of, or proof of, or evidence of Godzilla coming to the surface as this big disaster that's about to happen. And so we've had these fish wash on shore in California and in parts of Japan in the past. Recently in California, San Diego, down in parts of northern Mexico, northwestern Mexico as well. And we've got Hokkaido, the northern part of Japan, on high alert for megaquakes. We've got the, in fact, there was just a large series of earthquakes that resulted in one of the Japanese islands actually being evacuated because I think there were 1,000 earthquakes in the last 2 weeks, and that was enough to have the island evacuated. This is in the last 48 hours, I believe. I think it's about 48 hours they've evacuated this island. So there was a 5.5 that hit Akuseki Island in Kagoshima Prefecture. Okay, so the point is, though, you're tuning in for a 4th of July show. Why am I talking about earthquakes? Why am I talking about the Japanese Baba Vanga and the warning of a big earthquake? Well, it's because those little oarfish, they're an omen. They're a sign of something. They're a symbol of something. And those oarfish represent a natural, potentially cataclysmic, but a natural disaster that could be looming. And that develops into a myth. What is a scientific process to one person is a simple myth to another person. And although myths are not simple in any sense, to the average person, a myth is just a story. And a myth essentially has, no other meaning. Before I moved over here, I was having a conversation with my neighbor in the process of when I was moving, and he genuinely did not know what a metaphor was. We were talking about the Bible, and I said, I think much of the Bible is a metaphor. And he says, with a strange look on his face, what's a metaphor? I don't know what a metaphor is. And I said, well, it's kind of like a symbolic story. Jesus walking on water, he didn't literally walk on water. It's figurative. It's a metaphor, whether that's because of what he represents or what the water represents. If water represents illusion and you can rise above illusion, then you float on the water, or maybe you walk on the water like the rays of the sun. But, that's a metaphor. It's a symbol. It's a symbolic story. It also becomes a myth. And that is to me, part of the 4th of July story. It's part of the 1776 mythos. Now, if you see the title of tonight's show, 1776, A Myth to Live By, that doesn't mean, for anybody who might think that it does, that doesn't mean that I hate America and that I think America is a myth and that it doesn't exist, or that I'm going to sit here and trash the founding of the country or something like that. If you think that, you obviously haven't listened to this show, or you don't know that I wrote an entire, well, virtually a textbook on unconventional American history based on documents in the National Archives and state archives. It's called Liberty Shrugged, and we will be giving away a digital copy of that book on the show tonight. Little surprise for those of you listening live, we will be giving away a digital copy of that book tonight, Liberty Shrugged. And if by the end of the show I forget to mention who the winner is, just let me know in the chat. So we're going to talk about this mythology of 1776, because this mythology of 1776 is critical to understand if you want to understand American history and what the 4th of July really is supposed to be, as opposed to what we celebrate it to be. I'm not saying the celebrations are wrong. I'm just saying that there's a mythos behind it. There's a mythos behind all of it. Myth is what holds society and civilizations together. If it weren't for myths, we wouldn't really have as much of a cohesive foundation, because history is really complex. In fact, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, we reduce it to something such as it was just a big signature here and a small signature there, and it was a Declaration of Independence, and that was pretty much it. But the fact is, the Declaration of Independence was not signed on a single day. It was not, therefore, signed by all of the different delegates on the same day. And up until 1775, the conflicts that had existed in the colonies were anything but geared towards independence. They were about trying to reconcile differences with the crown. There might have been a handful of people that were speaking about independence, but it was about primarily finding a way to reconcile the issues that they had with the crown. And I mean, in fact, even after 1775, even after 1776, most of the people that lived in what would become the United States, most of the, quote, colonists, most of the people that lived there were very loyal to the crown. A very small percentage of the population was part of the, quote, revolution and part of the, quote, in declaring of independence. It's a very small percentage. Historically, it's estimated to be 3%, which is why you get a lot of people that take that percentage and they say that's a white supremacist number, which is a very stupid thing to say. I actually wore a Thomas Jefferson shirt to work one day when I used to work at the co-op in New York, and it was Thomas Jefferson shirt, and it said, "Obedience to God is what's that quote? Obedience to God," or I forget the quote off the top of my head. I'll look it up real quick. But I wore that shirt. It had the Roman numeral for 3 on it, and someone reported the shirt, and I thought it was so funny. They said, "You're wearing a white supremacist shirt," and I said, "Well, first of all, what would it matter if I was wearing a, quote, white supremacist shirt? I don't even know what that means." I said, "No, it's a historical shirt. It's a Thomas Jeff. It said something else on it too, but it's a Thomas Jefferson quote." And they thought it was a, quote, white supremacist shirt. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Thomas Jefferson's referenced as being the source of that statement, although others, I think, have been as well. In the same way that you hear the statement, "Give me liberty or give me death," that's not really in context. And it wasn't really said in that way. It's part of the mythology. It's part of the mythos, which again is necessary to have a functioning society. And if you want to understand this in the broader context of all society, you should absolutely read the work of Joseph Campbell, because he obviously was probably the most famous mythologist, and certainly was able to explain myth in a way that was understandable, although he still did it from a very scholarly point of view. So there's a little bit of everything in Campbell's work. If you've never read Joseph Campbell, you should definitely get on that as soon as possible. And there's a quote there's many quotes, but there's one quote that I think is relevant to tonight's show. It's this. It's what Joseph Campbell said. He said, "Whenever men have looked for something solid on which to found their lives, they have chosen not the facts in which the world abounds, but the myths of an immemorial imagination." And that, quote unquote, that is precisely what the 4th of July is. The 4th of July is, well, it's a foundation for the lives of Americans. And we're not choosing to believe the facts of the situation because the history of it, because it's too complex. It's way too complex. I mean, try to describe what you did yesterday. It's too complex. And if you try to explain everything that you did, if you can even remember it, nobody really cares about the details so much as they do the final outcome or the important components that led to the final outcome. Instead, we choose myths. We don't choose facts. We choose myths. They can be based on facts, but we choose myths. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's just the nature of how we function as humans. Myth is critical for human civilization. In fact, that's part of the, I don't intend to get political at any point tonight, but that's kind of the narrative of the neocons and has been for decades. The quote liberals or neoliberals have the same mythology, but the neocon mythology was and is that there must be an enemy image to hold society together. And if there's not an enemy image to hold society together, society will collapse. So we have to have this eternal enemy. We have to have the dictator, the guy with the saber rattling it, the guy with the weapons of mass destruction. There has to be something to bring us all together. There's an enemy. It's a religion. It's a group of people. It's another country. There has to be something to bring society together. And I think the reason that those myths are so prominent today is because we have, in large part, forgotten, or we have just given up the foundational myths of, I'm speaking from the point of view of an American, which is what I am. We've given a lot of that up. And I don't think that Americans recognize the importance of myth. And if you hear myth, you think it's made up. That's not necessarily the case. In fact, most myth is based on something real. And the myths that we tell, even if they're about, Greek gods, Roman gods, could be Chinese, Japanese, could be Native American stories, it could be African stories. I mean, most of the myths that we have in the world, they represent something very real. I mean, one of my favorite myths is the myth of Proserpina or Persephone. And that story, people hear it, and they think, oh my God, that's so horrible. This girl was in a field picking flowers and she was kidnapped by a god and he raped her. And it's just so, even though she's essentially a goddess, she's the daughter of the goddess of agriculture, the daughter of Demeter. But that's horrible. He raped her. That's just, there should be a women's rights movement and they should call themselves Persephone to fight against male aggression. It's like, that's not what it means. Persephone's the young, beautiful girl. She's picking flowers in a field. She represents the spring. And then here comes Pluto, here comes Hades from the underworld, the dark, cold realm of the fall and the winter, as in the pale horse and the black horse, who brings what? Starvation. Who brings what? Famine, if you don't do what you need to do in the fields and acquire and save the kinds of food that you need to survive the winter. So here comes Hades. He kidnaps the spring and takes her to the underworld. And when she's there, Demeter, her mother, is very distraught and allows the crops to die, which is how the ancients described the changing of the seasons. That's a symbolic story. That's a myth. It's filled with metaphors in the same way the Bible is filled in the words of Jesus that are in red. So I know that he said them. He speaks in parables. It says it right there in the Bible that it's a parable or a series of parables. And we don't need to get into the difference between parables, myths, metaphors, and allegories. The point is, these are symbolic stories. They're not meant to be taken literally. And the 4th of July, as we know it, is not really meant to be taken as literal, because as you'll see, that really wasn't the day, if you will, that the whole Declaration of Independence was signed and came to be. But if you went through the history of it, then it's going to be just too much and people don't care. So, I mean, it would be like if you say, I'm going to celebrate the 4th of July. Okay, great. But if I was to say it in a factual sense, I would say, I'm going to celebrate the 2nd of July, the 4th of July, the 8th of July. And you say, what are you talking about? And I'd say, well, that's when the declarations were made or read or fully signed within a 10-day period. That's not a myth. That's a fact. And that's going to be very difficult for people to understand. So you have to create a myth. And it's not even a negative thing or a malicious thing. It's just that's what a myth is. All right. So on that note, we'll go to the chat room. And I see a listener named Nick Keene says the real Independence Day was July 2nd. And Nick is right. The real Independence Day is July 2nd, if we're going to look at the historical facts of the matter, which we will here in a moment. Yes, July 2nd was really the celebration. And maybe I'm a righteous troll. I don't know, but I used to, that's what someone called me once. They said, you're a righteous troll. But I used to celebrate July 4th on July 2nd. And people would ask me, what are you doing? What are you talking about? And I said, well, that's when it was actually, that's really I mean, if you want to be factual, that's really Independence Day. No, it's not. 4th of July is. I said, no, it's the 2nd. What do you hate America? It's like the person who is an American history major hates America because they know the details of when it was actually declared and when it was signed. That doesn't make me special. It just means I have no life and I read a bunch of books. And that experience of people telling you that you're anti-American because you said happy July 2nd is just kind of a funny, humorous irony. So anyway, we're going to go to the chat. I guess it makes a lot of sense. The first person in the chat today was Patriot Girl. Patriot Girl, thank you for joining us on The Secret Teachings. By the way, the 4th of July, I've got a little bit of a tradition. It's like Christmas time. I always watch Christmas Vacation. But for the 4th of July, I'm all about The Patriot. It's actually one of my favorite movies all time, one of my top 5 favorite movies. I like The Patriot, that's top 5. And I like The Free State of Jones, which is a much more historically accurate version of the Civil War. You know, The Patriot, and this is actually really important for tonight's show, is kind of based on a couple of different historical characters. The caricature or the idea of what the Patriot represents is a character called I think he had different names, but the Swamp Fox. And it's based on a number of different characters, and it's obviously not that historically accurate. And since it's Mel Gibson, he has a stockpile of blood, so there's a lot of blood in that movie. But the Swamp Fox, Francis Marion, is really largely what that character in The Patriot is based on. And I think that that's really interesting because it's an example that we all understand and that we all know, in terms of it being, if you're an American, you probably know Mel Gibson's The Patriot. Again, one of my favorite movies. And the character itself is based on real life people who sort of, in a sense, revolutionized warfare and guerrilla tactics, which is largely in part what pushed the British back in the Carolinas and down further south, which I always have a hard time distinguishing north and south because I'm from Florida. I used to go to West Virginia, and I thought West Virginia was the north because I lived in Florida, which is I guess not even part technically of the South, because Southerners, Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas, they don't consider Florida the South. That's just kind of like its own thing. It's like an accidental appendage to the country. And then if you go to West Virginia from the South, you're like, oh, that's north. And you're like, no, that's not north. That's technically the South. So it always confused me. That's that perspective thing again. But the point is, it's that guerrilla warfare kind of revolutionized warfare, and it's based on a real person, or maybe 2 different people, but particularly Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. And I find that to be really interesting in regard to mythology, because you have a real character and then it's mythologized into a movie, which is not that accurate, but it does contain important critical details to the overall, history. And for those of you who are maybe curious and you'd like to see that character, you can go to even the National Park Service. They have a page on Francis Marion. Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, was born in South Carolina in 1732. And if you want to read the history of that, you'll learn about how he was, well, it doesn't necessarily go into the details on the National Park Service website, but if you read his story, he's really kind of the foundation for the Patriot movie. And I should also note, because I'm obsessive with information, if you were to watch The Free State of Jones, which I think is a relatively accurate movie, if you watch The Free State of Jones, it's based on a guy named Newton Knight, who Matthew McConaughey actually kind of looks like. And this movie, Free State of Jones, is not only pretty historically accurate, at least in comparison with The Patriot, but Newton Knight was a real person, and this is very accurate, again, in comparison with The Patriot. It doesn't have a great rating, but I thought it was a great movie, specifically because it shows how the Democrat Party, if you watch the movie, we ain't got no Republican ballots. You're going to have to wait a long time with those dark-skinned folks to vote Republican. It's a pretty interesting movie. So anyway, that's what I do on the 4th of July. Back to the chat room. Noka says, aloha, happy Friday. Thank you for the live shows, Ryan. Thank you for tuning into the show. I appreciate that. I'm just one nut. Says Washington would have been designed or designated a terrorist. Well, they were. As a matter of fact, in 1775, really before April of 1775, there really weren't a lot of murmurings about revolution in the context of independence. It was more of like a revolution of political issues and a resolving of political issues, dealing with liberty and taxes and things of that nature. And then after the British came to collect some guns, then things started to pop off. And on April 19, 1775, that's really when the revolution began. And around that time, that's when, to be a revolutionary, and there probably were a lot more, they just pretended to be loyalists to the crown, but to be a revolutionary was declared by the king an act of, well, basically terrorism. So you're right, yes, terrorism. And in fact, if you ever watch National Treasure, there's a kind of a humorous line in that movie where Nicolas Cage says, here's to the founders, here's to the people that founded the country, because if they had, lost, they would have been, tarred, feathered, they would have had their entrails ripped out, and they would have been executed. And that's, to some extent, that's exactly what would have happened. So here's to the founders of the country. It remains an act of terrorism. Joe Ryder is in the chat. Says, hello, Ryan. I hope all is well with you. I think things are well here, as long as July 5th doesn't involve a mega earthquake that sinks Japan, like the anime or the manga prediction, then I think everything will be okay. I'm working on that new book, and I'll hopefully have it done by the end of next week, at least the editing and all of that. Evan is here. Evan, greetings. I think Evan is one of the only people who uses, I'm assuming that's your picture, Evan, one of the only people that uses their actual picture. Bad Whiskey. No, I guess Bad Whiskey has his picture too, looks like, with his dog. Howdy. Flux is here as always. Hey, hey. Bev is here. And, well, the list just keeps growing. They've got a lot of people here. Darren Bird is here. Can't wait to hear this one. Well, we're into it already, and we'll go further. Patrick Hartman is here. Hello, Patrick. Planet Green 13 is here. Big bucket of what looks like tomatoes in that profile picture. I do like tomatoes. It's a great fruit. Rita Moore is here. Hello, Rita. I guess Rita uses their real picture too. Really love these Friday night shows. Thank you. Well, I'm glad that you were able to catch them this week. Deborah is here. Cyber Sicilian is here. The Sylvia is here. Chris is here as well from the UK, runs Ground Zero Plus. Thank you for joining us, Chris. Pound Town is here. WRP is here. Diane Perry is here from California. We also had a listener last week. Maybe they're still here tonight or are here tonight from South Korea. We've got a listener, I believe, named Shauna in Russia. I believe she's in Russia. So thank you all for tuning in to the Secret Teachings tonight. Some other listeners, including Paige Anderson in Kansas and Sonam Abel. I don't know where all of you are, but if you'd like to throw the location into the chat, I will put it on the screen, or at least it'll give me a better idea of where people are listening from. Noka says earthquakes are part of island life. Yep, that is true. Jackie is here. Good to know there will be a July 5th. Good to hear someone in the future. Yes, someone in the future. I am in the future. Leyland is here. I agree with Patriot Girl. Lane is here. We are going to go hard. Lane has all caps. I'm here. Let's go. We're going. Just give me a moment to get through some more of these chats. Matt Armitage is here. I only watch cartoon Godzilla from the 80s. I say that, maybe Tom and Jerry and Gundam, and I watch Dragon Ball Z. That's the good stuff. I don't know what is on TV today. Our common ancestry says, long time no here. I guess I was sidelined for a bit. I celebrate 4th of July only because of you. Clyde Lewis and Kev Baker, rest in peace. Keep being you. Oh, that's kind to say. They always said Kev Baker was the Clyde Lewis of the UK or of Scotland. I don't know what that makes me. I'm just, I guess, of Japan. I'm my own person, though. Jesus says, what's up? Howdy, Jesus, or maybe you pronounce it Jesus, but I usually say Hendrix. And the list goes on and on and on. I'll keep this. I'll go really quick here. Jabarlo, within the word believe is a lie. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Maybe it's a typo. And so on and so forth. We have lots of listeners. Matt Robinson is here. Hello, Matt. And Sandy Smith is here. Myths or heritage? Can it be both? Can it be both? Mark Weber is here. Says they love the Secret Teachings. They love TST. Thank you for joining us. I put Nick Keene on screen already because they said Real Independence Day is July 2nd, and they are right. Matthew Barekis is here. I mean, you could argue that April 19th is actually Independence Day too. That's the point. It doesn't really matter. It's just history is important and myths are important. And I'm really behind in this chat. Liberty for America in the chat. That's the most American name in the chat, except Patriot Girl and Liberty for America. How are you doing tonight? Thank you for joining us. Edward Preston is also here from Kentucky. Early Girl is here. Says there's a college named after Frances Mary on here. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I did not know that. That's interesting. And well, for sake of the show, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of all this. Mark Weber is in New Hampshire. Zach Manshire is in Oklahoma. What if we can get Early Girls in the Carolinas? What if we can get we got Evan in Texas. We got Rita in Indiana. What if we get all 50 states tonight? Get all 50 states tonight and territories. Can we do that? Enough people across the country. Here's Florida. Okay, Bev is in my home state, Florida. Sir Wolf is in the UK. Should we let people from the UK? Can we let Sir Wolf and Chris in the chat tonight, considering the show? Should we even let people from the UK in the chat? I'm joking. All right, so I think that pretty much does it. We got a listener in Chicago. Don't get shot. Listener in Iowa. Joe Ryder's in Iowa. Okay, so anyway, I've done my due diligence. I've looked at the chat. We don't do super chats. If you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe to the archive. You can listen to the free archive. You can download those shows. You can buy a book, Liberty Shrugged. That's my book that I wrote about American history. You can get a copy of that on our website, tstradio.info. That's tstradio.info. And we will also be giving away a free digital copy of that book tonight here on the show. Again, remind me if I forget to do that by the end, but you can get a digital copy of Liberty Shrugged on the website, tstradio.info. All right, so 1776, a myth to live by. Let's look at some of the history first in regard to July 4th, and then we're going to look at some other really interesting details. For example, there are things historically that are not just myths, but that sound like myths. I mean, for example, James Monroe, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams all died on the 4th of July. Did you know that? A lot of you probably knew that, but that's really weird, isn't it? James Monroe, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams died on July 4th. What are the chances of that? That sounds almost divine in some way. They all died on July 4th. That's really, really, really weird. And then there's, of course, some other weird stuff about American history, including the connections between Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. Both were elected to Congress in 46 or A46, different centuries, of course. Both became president in A60. Both lost sons while living in the White House. Both are remembered for their work to advance, quote, civil rights. Both were shot in the head on a Friday in front of their wives. Both were succeeded by presidents named Johnson, Andrew, and Lyndon, respectively. Both of their assassins were known by three names: John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald. Both murders involved theaters. Booth shot Lincoln at Ford's Theater. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested at the Texas Theater in Dallas directly following Kennedy's murder. That is also just quite bizarre. And those are not myths. Those are historical facts. Whatever that means, I don't know. But it's really interesting, and it's really an important part of our discussion on mythology and the myths that we live by. So if you want to follow along with this, you can go to my book, Liberty Shrugged, because it has all of this stuff in here, all of this history in there. We'll go to the chat real quick. I see Laura says, sounds fake. It does sound fake, but I don't know how much more real it can get. It's, in fact, you can verify these things independently, first of all, by yourself, but you can also, this is constitutioncenter.org. This is one of the main Constitution websites, and you can also verify it independently. But it sounds made up. It sounds fake. It absolutely does. All of this probably sounds fake too. The history of independence probably sounds fake. And it probably sounds fake because we have this this mythology about history. And I mean, everything I did in school was like American history, advanced placement. I read American history books. It was all largely American history. Later I got into, aliens and the occult, but it was mostly American history. And in most of this American history I read, it's all the same thing. It's all the same standard story, which is why I set out to write the book Liberty Shrugged, because I found all of these really interesting details that just don't seem to make any sense, that both confirm but contradict official narratives. And then you learn, oh, well, myths are really important to this whole thing. And it starts to make a little bit more sense. So on July 2nd, 1776, Congress approved the famous resolution for independence. July 2nd of 1776. After a draft document was formed, independence was approved on July 4th. So it's not so much that we're celebrating the signing, we're celebrating the drafting of the document. 2 days before that, Congress had approved the resolution for independence. So when Congress approved it, before anything was written or formed, I mean, that really is the official declaration of, hey, we're going to become independent. So that is July 2nd. And then the declaration was reportedly read to the public on July 8th. And New York as New York always is a thorn, as far as I'm concerned. New York did not pledge support for the for the Declaration of Independence, rather, until I think at least a day after that. And when they did, as New York is prone to do, there was a riot in New York, which, for one reason or another, New York is, again, always kind of prone to that kind of thing. People were really upset. Why were people upset? Well, because you were declaring that you were going to separate from the crown. The majority of people did not want to do that. There's certainly a percentage of the population that maybe they wanted to, but they were terrified of what that would mean in terms of the response. And then a handful of people that might have been on the fence, and then a very small number of people that actually wanted it. So when officials said, "Hey, look, we're declaring independence," riots broke out in New York because, well, that's a very dangerous thing. It basically is terrorism. It's treason, and well, the consequences for that are pretty severe. Also in the chat, I see Darren says, and I don't know this off the top of my head, but Darren says Jefferson and Adams died just hours apart. I've heard that. I'm pretty sure, I'm like 98% sure that's true. Off the top of my head, I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure that is accurate as well. So, okay, August 2nd. So this is like next month, August 2nd, 1776. The Second Continental Congress agreed on the engrossed version of the Declaration of Independence. And most delegates actually signed on August 2nd. So you could argue that if you want to, 4th of July is not the celebration of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. August 2nd is the signing, well, largely the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Of the 56 signers, most of them weren't even all present at any given time. So that's all contrary to popular belief that it was some great thing. Everybody stood in the same room and lined up and signed it, and everything was happy. That's not what happened. Okay, so July 2nd, Congress approves the resolution. July 4th, they draft and form the actual document. July 8th, they read it. New York doesn't pledge to it until the 9th, roughly the 9th. And then there's a riot in New York. And then on August 2nd, the Second Continental Congress agrees on the engrossed version of the DOI. And then that's when people actually signed it. You couldn't sign something before. I mean, they didn't draft it and then sign it. They drafted it, debated it, discussed it, shared it, talked about it, read it, and then it was signed. And of the 56 signers, not some of them, by the way, yes, were Masons, but of the 56 signers, not all were even present at the time, and some had not even become delegates yet. Elbridge Gerry, Oliver Wolcott, Matthew Thornton, Thomas McKean, and Lewis Morris all signed much later. Only one signer, Richard Stockton, recanted his support after capture by the British. It was, after all, a declaration of treason. Richard Stockton is the only person who signed it and then was like, I regret signing this. So contrary to popular belief, not all of the founders had the kinds of spines that some of them had. And I guess you can understand. I mean, we don't know what the British did to him. Maybe there's a book written on it, but I don't know what the British did to him. They probably threatened to kill him and his family. I assume something to that severe. It was treason, and so he recanted it and said, "No, I don't actually support it." So when I learned those little details and those little critical points, I thought, "Oh wow, that's interesting. That sounds important." And it's not that there's like a conspiracy to conceal this stuff, because it's all stuff that you can. I mean, I learned all this reading a lot of it was mainline history books. It's just it's the mythos that is, that I'm interested in here. So, for some people, this does sound like a conspiracy. It's not really a conspiracy. Hopefully you understand the complex workings of history and the contemporary politics of those times. Attempting to adopt a celebration based on the amalgamation of different dates it's not really a practical thing to do. It'd like to just celebrate all of it together. So you reduce it to a singular day. Adopting a singular day within the middle of all of that kind of allows for the establishing of a national identity. There's nothing wrong or destructive about this fact. On July 3rd, 1776, one day after the after this independence had been agreed upon by resolution of Congress, John Adams wrote this to his wife. He said, the famous Abigail Adams, who was much more instrumental and I'll get to that in a second. We'll get to his wife in a second. But this is what he wrote to his wife. He said, quote, "The 2nd of July, 1776 will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I'm apt to believe it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the greatest or the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore." Turns out we ended up selecting the 4th of July. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just historical information that if you're like me, you might find that little detail interesting. And for those of you who are wanting to read more about that, you can go, I'll show you on screen. You can go to this National Archives website, founders.archives.gov, and you can read the letter that was written to Abigail Adams. Now, as I was starting to say and kind of jumping all over the place, or starting to jump all over the place, Abigail Adams, see, this is what they tell you about history. They tell you history is like in America, women didn't have a right to do anything. Not true. In fact, so shockingly and unbelievably inaccurate that it really makes you call into question everything that you've ever been told, to the point where you just become one of those people who just doesn't believe that reality exists, and you kind of crawl into a hole and you're like, well, everything I've been told is a lie. Because women were involved in the revolution. And we're not going to talk about that tonight because it's not the point. But really, it's kind of an anti-myth in a sense. Like Mary Water Pitcher, for example, is a classical myth. It wasn't a single person. There were many women who were involved on the battlefield in terms of both the revolution and in terms of later the Civil War. And in all of these cases, women certainly didn't play the primary role. Without doubt, they didn't play the primary role or even a secondary role, really. They played a backup role. They washed clothes, they provided food, and they brought water to troops, which is where it's Mary. I think it's based on a woman named Mary, but Molly Pitcher is a nickname given to not just a woman, but many women who fought in the American Revolution. Did you know that? There's actually paintings of it. There's depictions of it. Women were really important in regard to the revolution. And, you say what you want, but the fact is, a lot of men might not have had the strength to carry on if it wouldn't have been for their wives. Like, look at these paintings. Look at these paintings. Obviously, this woman wasn't, and the various women were not loading cannons. Maybe one or two did. And there were some women that pretend, like Mulan, they literally tried to become men. They cut their hair off and they bound their breasts so that they could fight mostly in the Revolution, but I believe it also happened in the Civil War. One of them actually got a pension from the government after the fact. And you can say, well, that's just an isolated story. Well, how many isolated stories do you need before the narrative of women were all just put in the houses and locked away and so on, before you realize, like, oh, maybe we could understand the context of the time and what the roles are in society? Because as much as a woman was not really selected to be on the battlefield, a man was selected to be on the battlefield. And that's a really important little detail that's just kind of there on the surface that's ignored. Like, women were forced to sew things and bring water. Yeah, and men were forced to stand in front of fucking cannons. So I don't know which one's more preferable to you. I'd rather bring a pitcher of water to somebody rather than stand in front of a cannon. Okay, so men had responsibilities and duties as well. Obviously, this woman, and many of these women were not literally loading cannons, although maybe some of them did. It's symbolic, because by helping the fallen husband, you can see the man is on the ground dead and the water pitcher has fallen over. By helping the husband, you were fulfilling the role of essentially loading the cannon, because you're helping the man do what he needs to do and participate in the war. There are cases, however, of women actually doing something to this effect because this is well done. It's crazily well documented, where a woman would literally take the place of her husband who fell in battle, because the women who supported these men, they were hardcore. And not only were they on the battlefield or near the battlefield providing medical assistance, I mean, that's where the Red Cross comes from as well, talking about the Civil War, medical assistance, water, and things like that. But women would sometimes, and it wasn't, again, a universal thing, but women would sometimes take the place of their husband. In the same way that there were probably plenty of men who fled and didn't fight. There were some women that made it onto the battlefield and they helped their husbands. So symbolically, they loaded the cannons. But in other cases, their husbands were shot and then they physically, literally loaded the cannons. Were you shown this in history class? Because I wasn't, and I took every advanced placement form of history I could get my hands on in every level of high school, and I crushed all of them. It was the only thing I was good at was American history. I was like D student and everything else. And I never one time saw this picture until I was scrolling through like the National Archives, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Oh, there's more than one? Wait a minute, let me read about this. I even read a book on it, about the myth of it. And the author of the book, while admitting all this, was like, well, I mean, sure, it's true, but it's also a myth because women were just beaten down by these horrible men. We mean the men that stood in front of cannons? So things are not always as they seem. I mean, here's Smithsonian Magazine, Encyclopedia Britannica, women who shaped history. Molly Pitcher, the most famous American hero who never existed. Yeah, she didn't exist, but she was based on a real person. Molly Pitcher didn't exist, but a woman named Mary Ludwig Hayes did exist. And she's in the National Women's History Museum. So the next time you want to celebrate women, instead of celebrating, I'll be careful and choose my words very deliberately here, instead of putting up metal statues of fat women in New York who are just, well, again, I'll choose my words carefully. Instead of putting up statues of fat women in New York in their underwear with a crappy t-shirt on their stomachs hanging out, how about you put up a statue of Mary Ludwig Hayes, who was a real person? Why don't you put up that, who was literally the foundation? This woman was so famous and infamous that they literally created a myth about her called Molly Pitcher. That, I think, warrants a statue. Now, maybe there is a statue. They don't even know where she was born. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Maybe there is a statue in Pennsylvania. I've actually never been. I've been to Pennsylvania, of course. I lived close to Pennsylvania. I've never been to Philadelphia, which is, I don't want to go to the city today. I want to see the museums. I want to see the history. But maybe there's a statue there that if I went, I would notice it, or I would find it, or maybe some of you listening live in that area and you've seen it. Okay, but obviously we can agree that this is not a very well-known story. This is a real. This woman should be at the forefront of the quote women's movement, but she's not. Why? Because she was a real badass. That's why. And because she completely, just one person alone, her existence demolishes the anti-male, pro-woman, quote, neoliberal, socialist, Marxist agenda and modern narrative. It just demolishes that narrative. Because again, even though there weren't a lot of people like Mary Hayes, there were quite a few. In fact, even the Women's History website admits this. It says it was very common for soldiers' wives to follow their husbands when they enlisted in the army. Mary Hayes decided to join her husband at the Continental Army camp, where she often washed clothes and cared for the sick. Historians note that this is where the nickname Molly Pitcher could have originated from. Molly was a common nickname given to women that were named Mary. Pitcher represented the buckets women would carry for cleaning or providing the soldiers for water. And in fact, this is, I think, the best part. We'll read a little bit further. On June 28, 1778, Mary Hayes enlisted to serve with Captain Francis Proctor's company in the Pennsylvania Artillery. She's not the only one, folks. Many of the men who knew Mary often described her as 22-year-old illiterate pregnant woman who smoked and chewed tobacco and swore as well as any of the male soldiers. She gained popularity among the troops because of her hard work under fire and her bravery. So the men actually liked her. She was brave, and she was also pregnant, which is just nuts. And she's not the only one. Okay, so the fact is, women played a significant role as both supportive and directly in the revolution. And again, sure, yes, she's a myth is based on her story. And we don't know all the details of any of this. But I mean, even if you look at someone like George Washington, how many times have you heard George Washington hated women? On the contrary, do you know that George Washington actually credited all of his success, all of the stories about him, he credited all of it to his mother? Doesn't sound like someone who hates women. We don't need to get into a lengthy history about this, but it's all part of the mythos, and it's an important part of the mythos. And looking at the chat here, I'm not sure if this is sarcastic or serious. Let me see if I can pull this back up. Lancelot says, Ryan, do you believe everything you read? Well, it's not a matter of believing it. It's a matter of looking at the women's history, like the actual website, Women's History Museum, the National Women's History Museum, where the people that you would think are pushing these pro-female futures, no male involvement, are actually accurately reporting on the fact that there were women who participated in the revolution. And I don't know if that was a sarcastic question. If it was a sarcastic question, okay. But if it wasn't, that's my answer. But I'd also like to add something else to that. That is a common response that people have when you point out these historical facts. Oh, you believe everything you read? Well, what are you basing your belief on, or what are you basing that question on? And again, I'm not picking on Lancelot. I'm just as an example. What are you basing that on? You're basing that on what you learned in school, what you saw in some fictional movie. That's what you base your belief and your question about. You believe everything you read? Well, I would believe a lot more what I read from, quote, official sources that's not promoted than I would believing things from even official sources that are promoted, or unofficial sources that are just mere forms of fiction and entertainment that don't even align with, or don't even become myth. And you can say that, these stories are all fabricated, but no. Mary Hayes is a real person. Who she was, we don't know, but she's a real person. Like George Washington was a real person. But if you want to, but then again, if people want to be one of those, I'm not sure what to call it nowadays, but the people that are like, there can't be more than 100,000 people in the world. Okay, well, come to Tokyo, and then you'll find that there's definitely a lot more than 100,000 people in the world. Go up to one of the top of the skyscrapers and look out over the city, and you can't see anything but concrete jungle for miles. There's more than 100,000 people in the world. Oh, you can't believe everything you read in history. No, you can't. But what makes you think you can't believe something officially that's not promoted as over something that is promoted and that is really just largely a myth? Like this stuff's really important. And if we don't understand the context of this and the nuance of this, then we're going to never be able to really, unless you don't want to, really figure out what it is that makes us, if you're American like me, what makes us American. Also, I'm glad that Mark in the chat brought this up, because again, this is not the point of our show, but since we're on the subject, there's also another. I wrote about this woman in my book too, Margaret Cochran Corbin. I mean, she's considered this is, here, we'll go back. I'll show you the website here. Hold on a second. This is DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution website. I mean, there's Encyclopedia Britannica, Women in the American Story. It's another very important woman. But she was a Revolutionary War heroine, or it sounds like heroine. Pronounce that, heroine. Margaret Corbin had a hard life, very fascinating history. She's the one that, I mean, that's actually what that one painting probably represented, although it got tied into the myth of Molly Pitcher. There she is. She literally, this is what's recorded in the journals of the soldiers. She literally loaded the cannon after her husband got shot. And then there's a nickname for her. The act resulted in her becoming the first woman to receive a pension. That's what I was thinking of, I couldn't remember what woman received it, but she was the first woman to receive a pension from the U.S. military, which immortalized her as Captain Molly. That's important. That's like significant. That's like, Darren on the chat says it's called doing research. That's exactly what it's called. And the thing is, like, when I'm referencing all this, I'm going to official sources of history. I'm not going to, like, my opinion on the AmericanRevolution.org / half this shit is made up / I don't really know what I'm talking about .org. I'm going to official mainstream websites that contradict the quote official mainstream narrative, which doesn't mean that's why I believe them, but I'm going to official sources to dispel the largest myths that we hold as being just that, like it's just the 4th of July. No, it's not. It's not a bad thing to look at the 2nd of July or August 2nd for that matter. It's just important for the context of history and to understand that society's built on myths. It's built on myths. And we need to understand that because, not everything is real. I mean, for example, there's a very, very famous story about George Washington and even about Andrew Jackson as well, but about George Washington in particular, and about how George Washington had these visions about America's future, about the country's future. And he reportedly, supposedly, had these visions at Valley Forge. And people have quoted this as a factual thing, that he actually had these visions. And maybe he did at one point or another. But the thing is, that wasn't published, those visions, until 1861. He really didn't have visions like the ones told about in this story, because it was written by Charles Wesley Alexander, who published in 1861, who was a well-known literary figure, who wrote mostly fiction that was based on real historical characters. And in fact, I think this story is so interesting. I should read part of the story to you. I can kind of paraphrase some of it, but basically, Washington is sitting around a table, and he's preparing a dispatch, and this is at Valley Forge. And as he's doing this, he feels this very strange sensation. And as the story proceeds, he basically, he's not getting a response from the people he's talking to. And this thing that appears to him, rather, this thing that he's talking to. And so it kind of is like the Oz effect. Things kind of get quiet. He doesn't get a response from this kind of apparition or this whatever it is that's appearing there and talking to him, or, well, going to talk to him. And so time kind of slows down almost, and kind of he gets this weird feeling. And he almost feels kind of like stuck, like he can't move, he can't do anything. And he reportedly says, this mysterious, potent, irresistible force took possession of me. All I could do was gaze steadily, vacantly at my unknown visitor. Gradually, the surrounding atmosphere seemed as if it had become filled with sensations and illuminations. Everything about me seemed to rarefy, the mysterious visitor herself becoming more airy and yet more distinct to my sight than before. He began to feel that he was dying. And then he heard the voice say, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." Well, at that time, says, my visitor extended her arm eastwardly. I now beheld a heavy white vapor at some distance rising fold upon fold. This gradually dissipated, and I looked upon a stranger scene. Before me lay spread out in one vast plain all the countries of the world, Europe, Asia, Africa, and America. I saw rolling and tossing between Europe and America the billows of the Atlantic, and between Asia and America lay the Pacific. The voice said, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." At that moment, I beheld a dark, shadowy being, like an angel, standing or rather floating in the midair, or in midair, between Europe and America. Dipping water out of the ocean in the hollow of each hand, he sprinkled some upon America with his right hand, while with his left hand he cast some on Europe. Immediately, a cloud raised from these countries and joined in mid-ocean. For a while, it remained stationary and then moved slowly westward until it enveloped America in its murky folds. Sharp flashes of lightning gleamed through it at intervals, and I heard the smothered groans and cries of the American people. A second time, the angel dipped water from the ocean, a sprinkle of it falling as before. The dark cloud was then drawn back to the ocean, in whose billowing waters it sank from view. A third time, I heard the mysterious voice say, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." I cast my eyes upon America and beheld villages and towns and cities springing up one after another until the whole land from the Atlantic to Pacific was dotted with them. So this is reportedly, this is the mythos, the vision of the future of the country. And again, I heard the mysterious voice saying, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." At this, the dark, shadowy angel placed a trumpet to his mouth and blew 3 distinct blasts, very revelatory. And taking water from the ocean, he sprinkled it upon Europe, Asia, and Africa. Then my eyes beheld a fearful scene. From each of these countries arose thick black clouds that were soon joined into one. Throughout this mass, there gleamed a dark red light by which I saw hordes of armed men who, moving with the cloud, marched by land and sailed by sea to America. Our country was enveloped in this volume of cloud, and I saw these vast armies devastate the whole country and burn the villages, towns, and cities that I beheld springing up. As my ears listened to the thundering of the cannon, clashing of sword, and the shouts and cries of millions in mortal combat, I heard again the mysterious voice saying, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." When the voice had ceased, the shadowy figure, the shadowy angel, placed their trumpet to their mouth and blew a long and fearful blast. Instantly a light as of 1,000 suns shone down from above me and pierced and broke into fragments the dark cloud which enveloped America. At this moment, the angel upon whose head still shone the word Union, and who bore our national flag in one hand and a sword in the other, descended from the heavens, attended by legions of white spirits. These immediately joined the inhabitants of America, who I perceived were well nigh overcome, but who immediately taking courage again, closed up their broken ranks and renewed the battle. And the story goes on from there. Now, it was published in the 1860s, so Washington didn't actually write this. Maybe he kind of had an experience like that, but it's a fictional story. And it speaks to the development of the country and to the decimation of that country. And although people reference the light as of 1,000 suns as being like a nuclear bomb that's going to destroy the country, first of all, it's a fictional story. It's largely based on, the mythos of the country itself. It's written 100 years after the revolution. But it also says that there were the things that were actually seen in this vision were forms of combat that were related to the time in which Washington lived. So it's probably not, cannons, swords, people that are in like physical combat. That's not really nuclear war. That's like warfare from 200 years ago. Okay, so, but that vision is important because, and I'll quote you one more. This is an excellent book if you've never read it, by Manly P. Hall. It's called The Secret Destiny of America. And in the book, he talks about the vision, or the dream, rather. The same with Constantine had a dream, right? Constantine had a dream. Joan of Arc had dreams. But General McClellan also, general and a governor, he also had a dream. And he was a very instrumental force in preserving the Union. And General McClellan had a dream. I'm going to read you this from the book. This is basically what happened. It says, "His elation changed to great apprehension. He saw the enemy's forces moving to certain points which he himself had intended to occupy within the next few days. He quietly realized that in some way his plans were known to the enemy. Then again the voice spoke, 'General McClellan, you have been betrayed, and had God not willed otherwise, ere the sun of tomorrow had set the Confederate flag, would have waved upon the Capitol in your own grave. But note what you see. Your time is short.' His pencil moving with speed of thought, McClellan transferred the troop positions from the living map to the paper map on his desk. So it's almost like a form of automatic writing. When this had been done, McClellan became aware that the figure standing near him had increased in light and glory until it shone like the noonday sun. And as he raised his eyes, he looked into the face of George Washington." So George Washington actually appeared to McClellan in this story. And he says, General McClellan, while yet in the flesh, I beheld the birth of the American Republic, son of the Republic. It was indeed a hard and bloody one, but God's blessing was upon the nation, and therefore, through this, her first great struggle for existence, he sustained her, and with his mighty hand brought her out triumphantly. A century has not passed since then, and yet the child republic has taken her position to peer with nations whose pages of history extended for ages into the past. She has, since those dark days, by the favor of God, greatly prospered. And now, by very reason of this prosperity, has she been brought to her second great struggle. That's the Civil War. And that was around the time that this story about Washington seeing the flashing light in the dark past of the country was published by Charles Wesley Alexander. As the spirit visitor ceased speaking, he raised his hand over McClellan's head in blessing, and the next instant a peal of thunder rumbled through space. McClellan woke with a start. He was again in his room with his map spread out on the table before him. So McClellan had a vision too, and it related to George Washington's vision and the Civil War. And it's a myth, okay, but it's also an archetypical story that you read all throughout the world. Joan of Arc, Constantine, Washington himself, General McClellan, the list goes on and on and on, because they believe that they're divinely inspired, or people believe that they're divinely inspired. And if you're divinely inspired, well, you have this angelic assistance. You have these beings of light. You have these spirits. You have these angels that assist you and help you. They show you the future. They show you where the troops are. This is not a new thing. This is not unique to America. This is not unique to the United States. This is not unique to Washington. It's not unique to the, quote, founding fathers. It's not unique to any of it. That doesn't mean that I'm degrading America, although lots of people think that. What it means is much of our history is based on mythology, and it is mythology that is primarily responsible for holding us, society, together. As Campbell wrote, Joseph Campbell, he said, whenever men have looked for something solid on which to found their lives, they have chosen not the facts in which the world abounds, but the myths of an immemorial imagination. Imagination. And the myths of the United States are themselves legion. For example, Andrew Jackson was supposed to have been so divinely protected. And he's a toss-up as a historical character for me, by the way. Paid off the national debt, had silver as a payable form of payment. Really didn't like the bankers, but was also, like, at the time would have been considered like a leftist. Not in any way in the same way, because Jefferson was a liberal. I'm a liberal. I'm just not a liberal, if that makes sense. I'm a conservative liberal. These terms don't mean anything in regard to even 50 years ago, let alone 100, 200 years ago. Even before, obviously the Democrat Party wasn't even the Democrat Party in the early 1800s. And that's neither here nor there. The point is, these myths are foundational for not just in times of warfare, but they're foundational for everything, like the Great Seal, the flag. All of this is reportedly part of the divine order that is America. The Great Seal, when it was being designed, was reportedly given to the designers, including Jefferson, Franklin, and others. Franklin did want the turkey, by the way, but they chose the phoenix. But the Great Seal itself was supposedly given to them by a mysterious figure who came out of nowhere. There's different versions of the story, but they go into the courtyard or into the garden of the building that they're in, and they meet this cloaked figure, something from Skyrim or something. They meet this cloaked figure, and they give them a piece of paper and say, hey, this is the seal. And then they used it. Same thing with the flag. In fact, it's not just the seal and the flag. In fact, the Declaration of Independence itself was supposedly signed because of a mysterious figure who appeared and encouraged the delegates to sign, launched into a massive speech about why it should be signed. And I'll read you some of the speech that was reported. to have been said at that meeting. There were lots of speeches, actually. Even citizens were there listening to the proceedings. Jefferson expressed himself with great vigor, and John Adams of Boston spoke with great force. The Philadelphia printer, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, quiet and calm as usual, spoke his mind with well-chosen words. The delegates hovered between sympathy and uncertainty as the long hours of the summer day crept by. For life is sweet when there is danger of losing it. Lower doors were locked and a guard was posted to prevent interruption, which is also, by the way, that's a standard practice, but it's also Masonic. The guard at the door is a Masonic practice. According to Jefferson, it was late in the afternoon before the delegates gathered their courage to the sticking point. The talk was about axes, scaffolds, and the gibbet. And suddenly a strong, bold voice sounded. The strong, bold voice said this: "Gibbet. They may stretch our necks on all the gibbets in the land. They may turn every rock into a scaffold, every tree into a gallows, every home into a grave, and yet the words of that parchment can never die. They may pour our blood on 1,000 scaffolds, and yet from every drop that dies the axe, a new champion of freedom will spring into birth. The British king may blot out the stars of God from the sky, but he cannot blot out his words written on that parchment there. The works of God may perish, his words never. The words of this declaration will live in the world long after our bones are dust. To the mechanic in his workshop, they will speak hope. To the slave in the mines, freedom. But to the coward kings, these words will speak in tones of warning they cannot choose but hear. Sign the parchment. Sign if the next moment the gibbet's rope is about your neck. Sign if the next minute this hall rings with the clash of falling axes. Sign while your hopes in life or death as men, as husbands, as fathers, as brothers. Sign your names on the parchment or be accursed forever. Sign, and not only for yourselves but for all ages, for that parchment will be the textbook of freedom, the Bible of the rights of man forever." And as this speech goes on and finally concludes and ends, people begin debating again and talking, and eventually agree that, yes, this strange, mysterious figure is right. And then when the delegates decide to talk with him directly, he disappears. After speaking, the unknown speaker fell exhausted into his seat. The delegates, carried away by his enthusiasm, rushed forward. John Hancock scarcely had time to pen his bold signature before the quill was grasped by another. It was done. When they turned around to thank the mysterious figure, he was not there. Manly Hall writes, "Who was this strange man who seemed to speak with a divine authority, whose solemn words gave courage to the doubters and sealed the destiny of the new nation? His name is not recorded. None of those present knew him, or if they did, not one acknowledged the acquaintance." This is obviously a myth, but there may have been someone there who spoke to a certain degree like this, who spoke to encouraging the signing. But then again, we also know that the document wasn't all signed on that same day. So it's a myth. It's a story that there's some kind of encouragement. That voice is probably the outward expression of the people that were there debating all day and deciding, we're going to sign this, we're going to do this. We do this, it's treason, we're all going to be killed. Do we do this? Do we do this? And that's the motivation, is the speaker that gets up, who's mysterious, who's not there. It's the voice probably in the head that says, this is the right thing to do. This is God's will. This is the decision that will change, the document that will change, even more than the Magna Carta. This will change human civilization. And so they sign. And so what that means is the Great Seal, which was delivered by a mysterious figure, reportedly. The flag. What about Betsy Ross? The flag was reportedly delivered by a mysterious figure. Washington had visions, although that's a story published in the 1860s. George Brinton McClellan had visions. There's a mysterious figure who encouraged the men to sign the Declaration of Independence. You notice the women didn't sign it, right? Why? Because that wasn't their place. But if it weren't for the women, the men wouldn't have been in a position to sign it in the first place, and maybe wouldn't have even been as motivated to sign it, because and to fight for that matter, because you had to protect your family. And all of this was such a powerful mythos that developed, or all of this was so powerful that it developed into a powerful mythos, that it actually made it. I don't know if you know this. It actually made it across the ocean. And I don't mean like Britain. I don't mean the king who had his glasses on, or had to put glasses on or something equivalent to read the signatures. And John Hancock said, fuck that. I'm going to write it real big. Fuck this guy. No, I mean like way further away. Did you know that the stories of George Washington, John Adams, founding fathers in general, how's it taste, mother? You know, those stories actually made it to the East. And by East, I mean the Far East. Did you know that? What would you say if I told you, and hey, maybe there's a few people who know this, but what would you say if I told you that these stories were so powerful? Well, at least the basis was so powerful, and then what we developed into stories were so powerful that they weren't just mythologized in what we call the United States of America, and I mean probably to some degree in the UK too. They were mythologized in Japan. I wonder if anybody saw me going there with that. They were mythologized in Japan. In fact, there was an Edo period book, I believe it was dated to the Edo period, which documented the revolution and documented the founding fathers. And so the Edo period is dated to like 1600 to 1868. So basically until the period of the Civil War. And it was a period of learning in Japan. As a matter of fact, the Japanese script, we know there's kanji, there's hiragana, and there's katakana, which is for foreign words. But hiragana was actually developed by Japanese women. They were writers. And during the Edo period, we don't know, that we don't have the records, but it's estimated that based on the culture, based on the records that do exist, that virtually the entirety of, toward the end of the Edo period, virtually the entirety of Japan was literate. And that's really interesting, because if you fast forward to World War II, when the White House and Leatherneck magazine and Australian military officials and all the allies were calling the Japanese yellow monkeys and lice that needed to be exterminated because they're an inferior race and because they look different, and the Germans, as bad as they are, at least they look like us. The Japanese are the real problem. That's all in the historic record. I mean, FDR was an absolute racist piece of garbage, like an actual racist piece of garbage. Did you know that during that time, the Japanese actually had a higher literacy rate than the United States? And I just find that to be hysterical, that literally you had people in the United States saying that these people over here were illiterate and dumb monkeys and barbarians with yellow skin, when actually those people had a higher overall education rate and an overall literacy rate than the people in the United States saying that, which makes sense, because if you call someone a dumb yellow monkey who's basically lice that need to be, quote, exterminated, and the main center of extermination is Tokyo, in civilian neighborhoods, not military targets or government targets. They targeted civilians with experimental napalm, which is what you see at the beginning of Godzilla -1. That indicates that you're probably pretty ignorant and probably not that literate. I find that to be fascinating history. But anyway, we're going back to the Edo period. We're going back to this fascinating book. And what you see in this book, you obviously can't see it if you're listening to the show, but go after you listen, after you have downloaded and streamed the show, go check us out on the YouTube channel. And there's links on the website, tstradio.info. For those of you watching right now, obviously I'm speaking to the audio version of this audience. This is what you'll see. And this stuff is funny, I think. I mean, it's real, but it's also hilarious because what you see is Japanese versions, like literally, they're Japanese depictions of George Washington, John Adams, Washington's wife. I think Abigail is even in this. And this woman holding the bow and the arrow is the goddess of liberty. That's really, really, really kind of funny, cool, interesting. You might say, why are you showing us this? Why do I care what the Japanese thought about the American Revolution? Well, there's two reasons that that's important. One, in the same way that Japanese culture has greatly influenced the world. I mean, every camera, video game, car, virtually all of it, every camera, video game, car, and famous food is like from Japan, first of all. Like every tech company, like everything that you know, like I'd say 9 out of 10 things are from Japan. That influences Western culture. But Western culture also was greatly influential of Japan as well. And they love, you see more than Tokyo apparel, you see Los Angeles, New York apparel, Chicago sometimes apparel, anywhere you go here. Everybody wants to go to Chicago. Everyone wants to go to LA, go to New York. And I tell them, why would you want to go to Chicago? They shoot people in the streets there. Stay in Japan, it's much safer. Or go to some nice town in the US. I don't know. Go visit parts of like West Virginia or something. They got guns there too, but they only shoot bad people usually. So I'm being facetious and just kind of joking around. But the point is, there's that influence, and American history was so influential and so powerful that it made it all the way to Japan. And not only made it to Japan, it's mythologized in Japan because obviously George Washington didn't stand next to the goddess of liberty and fire arrows. Obviously, George Washington didn't punch a tiger, but that's what you see in the depictions. And I mean, just first of all, as someone who is an American history ophile and a Japanophile, there's like nothing more cool. There's nothing more fascinating than seeing a picture of George Washington punching a tiger. But that's how the Japanese depicted him. George Washington punching a tiger. That's what the image is. I think that's so funny. Look at that. You see the picture there? So George Washington's punching a tiger. Has anybody ever seen this before? I saw it a long time ago, and I frankly forgot about it until recently. But there's George Washington punching. Did he punch a tiger? I don't think so. Did he actually shoot arrows with the goddess of liberty? I don't think so. Look at Washington's face there. Look at the Oriental version of Washington's face. Which, by the way, speaking of Oriental, I might get flagged for saying that on YouTube, but I asked my wife and she said Oriental is actually a compliment. It's not a bad word. It means like beautiful pearl. So Oriental is actually the correct word to use. That's why they call them Oriental rugs. They're big, beautiful rugs. There's Washington in his Oriental form. I think this is so funny. I don't know why I think it's so funny. There's George Washington punching a tiger. Here's another one. This is, I think this John Adams killing a snake. Obviously, the giant snake is the crown. It's the king. This is how the Japanese depicted the American Revolution. And this image is really interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, John Adams with, I believe this is Abigail Adams here in the image. John Adams and Abigail Adams summon, like they conjure using magic. It's like American Revolution anime. This is John Adams and Abigail Adams. They conjure a giant, what looks like an eagle, a giant. Actually, it kind of looks like a Pokemon, a little bit. They summon a giant Pokemon essentially. This is real. This is from the Edo period. They summon a giant Pokemon, a giant eagle, and then with the eagle's assistance, they slay the serpent. See the eagle over here biting the serpent, and you see an Oriental John Adams stabbing the serpent in the belly. The reason I'm showing you this is not only because I'm an American historiophile and a Japanophile, it's also because I'm a mythologyophile, which means I love what phile means. Pedophile means pedo, child, phile, lover, Philadelphia, city of brotherly love, the love city. I'm a phile, so I'm a mythology phile too. I love mythology. And when I saw this image, I had never actually seen this particular image. I had seen the Washington one, but I had not seen the John Adams one. It made me think of Apollo killing the python, of the archangel Michael stabbing the serpent Satan, of the German hero Siegfried killing a dragon. And the way that Siegfried kills the dragon in the myth is by cutting its belly. It also reminds me of a Japanese myth of the god Susanoo killing Yamata no Orochi, which is a dragon who represents nature, because on the back of the dragon are all of these trees and all of these plants and all this dirt. This dragon is a representation in the Japanese story. This dragon is a representation of nature in the same way that the dragon being slain is the carnal self, the carnal thing that's inside of you. That is also the infidel. That's the animal that has to be sacrificed. That animal sacrifice is, of course, the blood sacrifices in the Bible, the animal sacrifices in the Bible. They're not always meant to be taken literally. You understand that, right? They're meant to be seen as symbolic, as metaphoric. You don't have to actually kill an animal, because your inner self is the animal. And so here's this image here on the screen. This is a Japanese depiction of Susanoo killing Yamata no Orochi. And this image is kind of, I guess, like a literal description of the myth itself, because in the myth, the way that he's able to kill the dragon is through deception, which is how Siegfried kills the dragon. He has to dig a trench, get under the dragon, cut its belly open. Just like John Adams. John Adams does the same thing. That is so funny. John Adams kills the dragon by cutting its belly. But the way that the cutting of the belly through deception is similar to what Susanoo does. Susanoo, he gives the dragon a bunch of alcohol, and the dragon drinks and gets drunk. So it's in his stomach. It's affecting him. And then Susanoo comes down and kills the dragon. Again, that's the story of Siegfried. That's the German story. That's the story of the killing of the animal self. That's the animal sacrifice. That is the story that we read all around the world of the killing of the dragon that sits on the treasure, which is the spirit, which is the soul, the true self that's overwhelmed by the carnal nature. That's the story of Apollo, the eagle, killing the python, the Delphi oracle. So the python lived. That's why they call her the Pythia, the woman that sits there on the 3 foot, or the 3, not 3 foot, the 3 has 3 feet, the chair that has 3 feet, the tripod, Pythia. And again, that's Michael stabbing the serpent Satan. That's us killing the carnal nature. And that's a universal story. And yes, as Flux says in the chat, the tiger is a metaphor. Obviously, John Adams didn't kill a giant snake. And yes, George Washington didn't punch a tiger, but he punched the king. Matt Armitage in the chat says Washington punches a lion, King George. Probably. I mean, it's a tiger, but it has the same. Actually, it's interesting. That's an interesting thing that you say, Matt, because in the West, we know the Lion King, and it's a metaphor also for the sun, the big mane, the big solar corona. But in the East, the tiger is actually the king of the jungle. So yes, when Washington is depicted in Edo area art as punching a tiger, he is punching the lion. He is punching, if you translate it, lion to tiger, and bears, oh my, he's punching the tiger. which is the lion in the West. And so he is punching the king, essentially. And he's not killing the king, he's punching the king. Okay, he's wounding the king. And then you have a different version of that in this bird that John Adams and Abigail Adams summons. And in summoning that bird, they kill, which is the Apollo Python myth. They kill the serpent, and the killing of the serpent is the killing of the British Empire, or the connection to the British Empire. And that is all part of the mythos, all part of the metaphor. It's, as I included the stories of Susanoo and Siegfried and the Archangel Michael and the Cardinal Self, all of that is critical to understand, because it means that these are universal stories and they're symbolic. They're obviously not real. I don't know why I have to keep saying that, but some people genuinely think that. Oh, look, the Japanese said that he punched a tiger. Does anybody actually think that George Washington had Oriental features and punched a tiger? If so, I've got some beachfront property in Tucson for you. But this is also important for a different reason in regard to the serpent. And I'll show you the reason here. Just one moment, if I can actually get this loaded up on my computer. The first, or at least one of the first political cartoons, I know that everybody probably knows where I'm going with this. One of the first political cartoons was credited to Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin's cartoon depicted the states as a serpent. And a serpent that was cut into pieces. And the cartoon read, "Join or die." And in that simple statement and that simple depiction, Franklin was a very smart guy. This political cartoon is partly responsible for encouraging the kind of resistance, kind of like that mysterious speaker, the kind of resistance that led to what became the United States of America. It's all based on the serpent, because the serpent has a lot of symbolic significance, going back to the Garden of Eden, for that matter. Also in the chat, Matt says, did he? I'm guessing you're referring to Adams. Did he use a Masamune sword? I don't know. Maybe. It doesn't look like it's a katana. It looks like a Western officer's sword. That's a funny question. Famous sword maker. Joe Ryder says the one image looks like a phoenix. Well, so that's another interesting thing. Okay, first of all, the phoenix was selected as the symbol of the country, the bird of the country. It was changed to an eagle for various reasons, some of which are official, some of which are mythological. Franklin did not like the idea of the eagle. He liked the idea of the turkey. You might think that's silly, but you have to understand the context of the time. And the eagle, nonetheless, was based on the phoenix. And in fact, the entirety of the design of the Great Seal, the entirety of the design of the flag, of the motto, E pluribus unum, all the stuff that we know about the iconic imagery of the United States of America, all of that is Freemasonic secret society. It's a universal thing, the unfinished pyramid, because no matter where you are in the world, we're all unfinished. Every deed we do is another brick. Every one of us who do not necessarily good deeds, but contribute to society and build a better world, all of us are bricks in the societal Great Pyramid. And so, yes, a phoenix was selected initially. And yes, the pyramid does refer in part to the Egyptian pyramids. And all of this stuff directly relates back to the mystery schools. And some people say that's a bad thing. I say it's a neutral to a good thing. Oh, they're secret societies. Christianity was a secret society too, right? Which is why they were accused of all kinds of horrible things. Now they accuse other people of horrible things. But it was actually, did you know that this is unrelated to tonight's show, but did you know that during the rise of Christianity in Rome, the Christians were accused of pedophilia? The Christians were accused of torture. They were accused of kidnapping because they did everything in secret. Pagans didn't. The pagans weren't accused of that until much after the fact when Christianity became dominant. Then they started accusing the pagans of doing all these horrible things. I just find that as an interesting little sticky note on our story here. Okay, so let's look at some of these other images real quick. Join or die. Join or die. Okay, here's George Washington. This one's reportedly George Washington too. He's in a carriage, and here are some of the troops. There's no stars on the flag, just stripes. Here is another one. This is, I think, well, I already showed you that one. I think I took, oh, did I have actually had two pictures of that? Delete that one. Here's another example of the slaying of the serpent. And here is George Washington defending his wife from a British official. It's pretty interesting, huh? So these myths are so powerful. The Great Seal, the flag, the mysterious speaker, the visions of Washington, McClellan. In fact, in Manly Hall's book, The Secret Destiny of America, there's even a section where he describes the prophecy that was written in the time of Washington's birth. And I don't have to read the whole thing to you, but it basically refers to the creation of a new country, and that Washington would essentially become that lofty figure who would be able to make it happen. It's a really interesting book if you want to learn a little bit more about some of this stuff. But I'm not getting everything tonight from this book, just for the record, but it's a really interesting book. So with all of that, we can say that what the American Revolution, what the Declaration of Independence, what all of this stuff was, well, it's, first of all, it's a myth, but it's also a myth that's based on factual things. And it's, as the visions of McClellan and Washington indicate, there's thunder, there's lightning, there's a great shaking, a great cataclysmic event, a great shifting, a slaying of a serpent, a punching of a tiger, of a lion. There's a lot happening that is equated with natural phenomenon, things that are, severe, like a severe storm or even an earthquake. We say things are, groundbreaking, ground shattering, the start of something new, the changing of the guard, which is what the founding of this country was. And so we go back to those oarfish that have washed up on shore. And those oarfish that have washed up on shore are scientifically understood, but also mythologically understood indications that there's a great earthquake that is coming. Could be in 5 years, 10 years, could be in 5 minutes. We don't know. And I link the two together, not only because of the Japanese fascination with Western culture, as our cultures are in the West are fascinated with Eastern culture, and Japan in particular, and because of the Edo period depictions of our founding fathers, but because there's a prediction today, July 5th, my time, July 4th, your time, that there will be a great earthquake in Japan. And that prediction is based on a vision by a woman who has had other visions that have come true, including the 2011 earthquake. And we can look at these kinds of predictions or these kinds of psychic visions as just being part of a mythos, part of the apocalyptic archetype, part of just trying to get publicity, etc. But while that might be the case, it's also true that there have been, right on schedule with what she had said, there have been a tremendous number of earthquakes in Hokkaido and in southern parts of Japan. In fact, thousands of earthquakes in the last 2 weeks to the last 48 hours. Thousands of tremors. And That doesn't always mean that there's going to be a giant earthquake, but it's a good indication that something might happen. And so something that otherwise might be relegated to, I don't know, relegated to just myth is actually scientifically definable. And something that might be just relegated to myth is also very understandable in regard to, well, in our case, American history. And I think there's a good example of what I'm trying to get at here in the chat room. I saw someone say, this is Sonam Ebel says, United States Constitution is a myth of freedom. Well, no, I think to the contrary, it's not a myth of freedom. It is a divinely inspired document, divinely inspired in the sense that it teaches that all are free. And I don't think conservatives or liberals fully understand the context of the document. As one constitutional, I think it was a constitutional attorney said, Democrats only study the Constitution to learn how to subvert it. And we can add to that conservatives have, no idea what the Constitution is. I mean, look at every successive administration, left wing, right wing, it doesn't matter. And these people have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. Well, you're saying you have an idea? Actually, yeah, I do think I have a pretty good idea of what it means because I've read the historical books, because I've read all of the documents. I've read everything that, the context of all of it, and I have a pretty good understanding of what it is and what it means. And the people that typically talk about this kind of stuff in the media, for example, politicians, they take little bits and fragments that aren't that accurate. I'll give you a great example, the 3/5 compromise. Anybody know what the 3/5 compromise is? Everybody says the 3/5 compromise has everything to do with racism and slavery and bigotry. And actually, on the contrary, it's the opposite. The 3/5 compromise is exactly what it sounds like. It's a compromise. And in a compromise, usually people don't all, agree and get exactly what they want. They agree and get part of what they want. And so what the slave holding, and I don't want to say slave states per se, because slavery was not generally accepted. It maybe was a byproduct of the day and age, but it was on the way out. And so in these states, they call them slave states, but states that allowed for slavery. And yes, Flux, I see in the chat, says Articles of Confederation, and we'll talk about the Confederate Constitution as well, or the Declaration of Independence. The point is, because we're limited on time, the so-called slave states, what they wanted was a counting of slaves that they could bring in uncontrollably. And in bringing in those slaves uncontrollably, if they were to be able to count those slaves as, and that includes white slaves for that matter, but if they were to be able to include those slaves as people for the census and for therefore obtaining representation in the states, it would have allowed, quote, slave states to have complete and absolute control over Congress. Slave states would have had total and absolute control over everything because they could just bring in more people, which kind of sounds like what happens today with illegal immigration. And even going back to Ellis Island, where you had Democrats that would literally take people that could barely speak any language at all, any English at all, and they would take them and they would basically sign them up to be voters and then drive them to the voting booths. And the same thing happens today. The illegal immigrant is the modern version of the slave from 200 years ago. That's a horrible thing to say. No, it's true. It's a true thing to say. And so the anti-slave states, delegates, said, no, that's not going to happen, because if you do that, you'll have complete control. And the people that wanted it were like, well, yeah, that of course. And they said, well, then we're not going to sign this then. We're not going to do this. So we want to compromise. Okay, look, you can count those people as 3/5 of a person. That includes white slaves. They didn't say you can count black slave. They said the slave can be counted, that any slave can be counted as, well, 3/5 of a person. And that compromise was not intended to preserve slavery. It was intended to end it because it gave temporary power to the people that wanted to count all slaves all the time and bring in more for total and absolute political domination and control based on representation in Congress. But it actually gave that power to them temporarily with the wealth and the influence that came with it. But it also stripped it away from them in the long run, because what it did was it gave the non-slave holding states the ability to fight against the increase in the slave trade, which by the time Jefferson was president, he had ended it. He ended the transatlantic slave trade and put a stop to all the new importation of slaves. So that's what the Three-Fifths Compromise was. It was actually an agreement to end slavery. It temporarily allowed it to continue, but it ultimately, in the end, was a major contributor to ending that practice. And you would think that's something that's, maybe would be told in history class. You'd be told that, but no, instead you're told the Three-Fifths Compromise says that you can count slaves as 3/5 of a person, and that's just, they don't even think they're real people. And you know what I say to that? Shut the fuck up, because you don't know anything about history. And when I say shut the F up, I'm not speaking to you as an audience. I'm speaking to the idiots that say dumb stuff like that. Okay, the Three-Fifths Compromise was about ending slavery, not preserving slavery. And likewise, the U.S. Constitution, we the people. What about the black people and the brown people? Are they people? It says we the people. It doesn't say we the white people. Well, that's what it's supposed to mean. Who interprets it that way? No, it says we the people. America's crime is not slavery. America's glory is ending slavery. And we the people means everybody. And if you don't think brown people mean everybody, then you're the bigot. If you don't think we the people means women, you're the bigot. If you don't think the word mankind means men and women, you're a bigot. You're the bigot. You're the problem. Because we the people and mankind means everybody. And thus, if we're talking about the Three-Fifths Compromise, or we're talking about the Constitution, we're talking about documents that really are divinely inspired in regard to the time in which they were written. And as part of the mythos, this really was the Constitution specifically. It really was a miracle at Philadelphia, which is one of the better books that was written about the Constitutional Convention. If you want to read it, it's called Miracle at Philadelphia, and it was written by Catherine Drinker Bowen, I think was her last name, how you pronounce it. That's an important little detail, but they don't teach you that in school, do they? Do they teach you that in school? No, I don't think so. That's actually what the Three-Fifths Compromise was. And it had to do with taxation purposes and things like that too. But did you know that the Confederate Constitution actually was written to preserve the institution of slavery? Which means that the U.S. Constitution is not a racist, slave-promoting document. Because, hey, if it was, well, that would mean that the Confederates would have no reason to write another document, would they? Why would they need to write another document if the Constitution, the federal Constitution, was a document that forbids slavery? And this is just an utterly, quite frankly, it's an utterly shocking piece of historical fact. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to read it to you. One grossly overlooked issue of American history, this is from my book, involves the differences between the U.S. federal Constitution and the creation of the Confederate Constitution. Whereas the former never mentions slavery, something that detractors claim is due to hidden codes concealing inherent racism. These are the same people that say there were hidden codes in Hitler's plan to kill the Jews, although he didn't actually have a plan. The Holocaust Museum says he didn't have a plan to murder Jews, and they say they decided at the Wannsee Conference, but the Wannsee Conference, there's no record of that. They had a final solution, which was deportation of Jews. And, it's all in code words, right? He didn't say it, but he believed it. Well, he was a big monster. They all had these horrible plans, and they were all proud of it, but they didn't want to document it. Same kind of a thing. Okay, this is what it says. Article 4, Section 3, Subsection 3. You look this up online. I think it's in the state archives of most of the southern states. I think I got it from Georgia. It says this: the Confederate States may acquire new territory, and Congress shall have power to legislate and provide governments for the inhabitants of all territory belonging to the Confederate States, lying without the limits of the several states. And many permit them at such times and in such manner as it may be law provide, to form states to be admitted into the Confederacy. In all such territory, the institution of, quote, Negro slavery, end quote, as it now exists in the Confederate States, shall be recognized and protected by Congress and by the territorial government. What does that mean? Why would they need to write that if the federal Constitution allowed for slavery? Anybody want to explain that to me? Because the federal Constitution forbids slavery. The federal Constitution forbids slavery, and so the Confederates had to write a new constitution that preserved slavery. And, once you learn something like that, you kind of just start to feel like, okay, if you're me, I get pissed. I get really, really pissed. Because it means a couple of things real quick here. It means that not only have you been lied to, but you've been lied to in a particularly malicious way by people that actually support, quote, Negro slavery, and that always have, and other forms of slavery, which were never race-based before they became race-based, when we tried to do away with them. But you've been lied to by people that have painted a document. Frederick Douglass said it was a glorious document. The Constitution was that cast away the shackles and the fetters of humans. It was a beautiful document. And that's the guy whose statue they ripped down in New York when I was living there, Frederick Douglass. He was criticized because he bought his freedom. That's justifying slavery. He became one of the greatest voices in American history. But the point is this, folks. The point is this. And I'm going to bring on the screen right now. This is from my book. This is the Confederate States of America Constitution. And this is the Library of Congress in Georgia. And you can see right here what it says. This is from my book again. They had to write this because it was illegal. So they've lied to you about that document, that glorious liberty document that Frederick Douglass referred to. And the people that lied to you about that are the people that actually believe the thing that they're telling you the federal Constitution promotes. It promotes slavery. No, the Confederate Constitution promoted slavery. And that's a pretty important, key, critical little detail to include. And if you ignore that little detail and you just don't even care about it, obviously it's going to create some conflicts in the historical narrative, the historical record. Same with the 3/5 compromise. Same with thinking that all that story of Molly Pitcher and Mary Hayes and other women that contributed to the American Revolution, those stories are just fake. You know, you kind of miss the point of what this all is and what this all means. Mysterious figures didn't literally create the Great Seal or the flag or speak at the Declaration of Independence signing. Washington didn't actually have a literal interaction with the spirit. But, you know, in some ways that they did, because believing that something like this was divinely inspired, then, yeah, of course, you're speaking to the spirit. There's something inside of you encouraging you to sign, the voice that says, you know what to do. It's the right thing to do. Do it, do it, do it. And that is why 1776 is a myth to live by. It's a powerful, powerful myth. It's a powerful myth that we should never forget, because that myth is a great cataclysm to the serpent, to the tiger, if you will. That is the crown, the king, and all others, all tyrants. Death always to tyrants. Death always to tyrants. And resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. And I can promise you this, it ain't the God that a lot of you think. And it ain't the God that Christians worship, because most of our founders were agnostic. The God that they worshiped was the creative force, whatever that is. And that's not something that can be defined, as Joseph Campbell says. All right, I'm Ryan Gable. This is The Secret Teachings. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. That is the myth to live by. We have a bunch of new listeners in the chat tonight. Zach Mansur is here. Says his band's name is Tyrant Death. Death always to tyrants. Joe Roop is here, lighting the void. Through him on screen. Thank you for jumping into the chat, Joe. Mistos Dokos is also here. Fuck you, tyrants. People don't like tyrants in the chat. So be very careful who you support politically, because, you know, when you got a difference between Trump and Mamdani in New York, both of them actively engaging in First Amendment censorship and restriction, you know, who needs enemies when you have friends like that? And who needs friends like that when you have enemies like that? Conservative, liberal, socialist, communist, Marxist, whatever. How about constitutionalist? What about, did you vote for this person or that person? How about, I don't give a fuck which one is in office, as long as they follow the rule of law. It's like that old Jerry Seinfeld bit. Get on a plane, captain gives you all the details. You're going to take it up to so many thousand feet, going to do this, going to do a flip, going to do a turn, we're going to bring it in about 5 minutes early. And you're in the back thinking, great, I just get to where it says on the ticket's really the issue I have. And that's how I view America. I don't care who the president is. I don't care who the members of Congress are. I don't care who's on the Supreme Court. Just kind of like follow the document. Just kind of follow the rule of law and stop lying to people about it. Thank you so much for joining us. Subscribe, grab a book. If you want to donate to us through PayPal or Cash App, it's under the show description. And please share this show. I think it's a great show. I think the mythos of all of this is unique, and especially the Japanese depictions of American mythology. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you all enjoyed the show. It appears to be so in the chat. A lot of liberty in the chat, a lot of hatred for tyrants. Patriot Girl, Liberty for America, a lot of hatred for tyrants. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And yes, Sonome Ebel says, give out the free digital copy of the book. I did forget. Thank you for reminding me. A free digital copy of Liberty Shrugged. We're going to do this. If you don't have the book yet, the first person to email me, I'll look at it based on timestamp. The first person to email me and reference the show tonight and just tell me something that you learned or something you found interesting. First person to do that and look at the timestamp gets a free copy of Liberty Shrugged. All right. Have a great night. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay safe, stay informed, stay healthy. And I will talk to you on the next broadcast. I'm going to go do some additional work on my new book, and then I'm going to watch The Patriot, Francis Mary and the Swamp Fox. Have a great night.